It is so great to be here. It's really a privilege to be able to come to the Quad Cities and to be welcomed by the Malay family and to get to know your guild. I was telling Bishop after Mass that it's truly like my heart is here. We're all part of the body of Christ. We're all doing the same work, and then we're loving in the same way, just in different places in the country. And so to be able to come and join another community for their White Mass is really beautiful. The Feast of St. Luke is so special to me. I got my first medical school acceptance on the Feast of St. Luke in 2007. I didn't know it was the Feast of St. Luke until I went to Mass that evening, and then I couldn't believe it because here I was. And even back at that early time, I already knew that this was something special, this calling and this beautiful gift that God has given me in becoming a Catholic doctor. And so it's truly one of my favorite days of the year, and the White Mass is one of my favorite events because it's a tangible sign of saying again, Lord, I am here and I'm willing to serve and I'm going to love you in this work you've called me to do. And so I hope that today this talk can also be a source of encouragement and joy for you in your work, in whatever line of work you do or in your studies, and in the callings that God has placed in your heart. So to start, I would like to start with a prayer. If you could join me, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is a prayer St. Padre Pio wrote of trust and confidence. O Lord, we ask for a boundless confidence and trust in your divine mercy, and the courage to accept the crosses and sufferings which bring immense goodness to our souls and that of your church. Help us to love you with a pure and contrite heart, and to humble ourselves beneath your cross as we climb the mountain of holiness, carrying our cross that leads to heavenly glory. May we receive you with great faith and love in Holy Communion, and allow you to act in us as you desire for your greater glory. O Jesus, most adorable heart and eternal fountain of divine love, may our prayer find favor before the divine majesty of your heavenly Father. Amen. Amen. Thank you. And so I just have a few objectives, but really this talk is about how do we live our faith in our work, in whatever line of work we do? How do we live it joyfully? How do we stay positive and upbeat and not get discouraged in the culture we live in? And I want to provide some practical tips on how to do this. Some of these things might be review, maybe some of them will be new. I hope that you can leave today with just a renewed pep in your step on how great it is to be Catholic and to live in our world today. And so I'll be sharing my story, but also things that I've learned along the way from different mentors and spiritual directors and things like that. So a few disclosures. You probably know that I'm Catholic and that I really love my faith. And I think it's through this walk in medicine, in this professional work, that God has made my faith just come alive. And I truly feel that it can be like that for each one of us in whatever work, whatever calling God has put in our hearts. And so for me, I'm a palliative medicine doctor. So I did internal medicine and then I subspecialized. And for those who may not be familiar, palliative care is for people who have serious illness, who I help accompany them with any symptoms or stress, side effects of treatment. I work with a multidisciplinary team to help them live the best life possible when they have something that oftentimes is incurable. And I really find that it's a super joyful field, especially in the setting of my faith, to be with these people and to uphold the dignity, the immense dignity that they have, especially in the difficult world today. I think there's such a place for this, to accompany these people. And so some people say, oh, your job is so sad, but no, my job is so joyful. And I'm passionate about advocating for the sanctity of life, especially when it's nearing its earthly end, and to really try to bring the church teachings to life in the trenches, in whatever way that might be. So to start, I'm going to lead us in a little exercise, if you don't mind. And I would like everyone to close their eyes for a moment. And I would like you to think back to what originally influenced your decision to enter a career in medicine, or a career if you're in a different line of work, or if you're a student, or if you're a priest. What drew you into this? Why did you decide to choose it? Did you feel it was a calling? Think back to a particular moment. Perhaps when you got accepted to medical school or grad school or seminary. Think back to that day you got your first job, or match day as physicians when you learned where you'd be going for training. How did you feel at these instances? Think back to a particular patient or client or parishioner, either recently or remotely, who you feel you directly impacted in a positive way. Think back to an instance where your Catholic faith particularly made you a better doctor, a better worker, better student. Okay, open your eyes. Thank you. I want you to keep these instances in mind, because for me, when I look back at those moments, they're oftentimes filled with such joy. And I think in the day-to-day mundane life that often we lead, it's hard to go back to that moment of what really drove us to do what we do and why, or what was that instance where we felt for sure God was calling us toward that, because in the midst of all of the paperwork and patient care and electronic medical record, we can just feel overwhelmed. And it's really helpful, I think, to step back and say, wow, this really was a gift. And I have so much gratitude and joy for that calling. And so I'm going to share a little bit about my path, because I never would have envisioned I would be standing up in front of you today. And I never would have thought that I would be in palliative care. I didn't even know what palliative care was a few years ago. And I am from southern Indiana. I'm a river community right across from Louisville, Kentucky, so 2 states with the river between, so I kind of get it. And I grew up Catholic, and then it was in college where I really grew deeper in my faith. And I'm so grateful for that, because when I went to medical school, it was my first time that I wasn't in a Catholic sort of supportive environment. And at Tulane, it was great to be among so much diversity, but it was also, I realized that I was sort of alone in a lot of ways. And I was very naive. I would make comments like, well, I'm never going to prescribe contraception when I'm a doctor. Or I would talk about my faith. And I would sort of be attacked in a sense from my classmates, or at least challenged. And they would say things like, well, you belong to the biggest cult in the world. What is that like? Or there's no way you're going to be able to live your faith in your work. And I realized in those moments that although I could talk the talk, I wasn't sure I could walk the walk. And I realized that I couldn't really defend it. I couldn't really back it up. I kind of knew what the church taught, but did I really fully believe it? And I kind of had this soul-searching moment of, who am I and what am I doing here? And what does it mean to be a Catholic doctor? Because I don't think it's just on Sundays. And Bishop talked about this today. How do we bring our faith from being in Mass on Sunday, and how do I be Catholic every day of the week? And what does that look like in my day-to-day patient encounters? What does that look like in my studies? What does that look like as I interact with those around me? And I realized I'm going to have to choose to actively live my faith. I cannot be a passive Catholic in today's world. No way. I will not survive. And what did that look like? And I had this $1 million question that I asked myself. Could I live authentically as a Catholic in today's healthcare system? And could I live out the professional vocation that God was calling me to consistently according to the church's teaching? And I like to highlight this word professional vocation, because I had a spiritual director in undergrad who was helping me because I struggled, because I was feeling called to be a wife and a mom, but I also felt this deep calling too to medicine. But a lot of my friends didn't have that. And what did that look like? And she said, well, Natalie, you have the vocation to marriage, but you also have this professional vocation to medicine. So I'm going to be using that term a lot today because it has helped me so much. Because really, this is how God is calling me to serve the people around me. And this is a serious calling. But how do I really form myself and make myself the most effective to love others in this way? And so it's really scary because this is amidst the grave reality of all around me, of all these issues that I'm hearing about in medical school. And it was discouraging for me to learn about the state of medicine and these perspectives that, like, everyone out there is providing abortions and contraception, and physician-assisted suicide is the way to go. And it's really scary. And you look at it and you're just like, this is totally not consistent with what I believe. And the world is saying I need to involve myself in these things and have this relativistic mindset. And as I'm in the classroom, I'm realizing in a real way that the gravity of this hits me. That patients are going to be coming to me in a very vulnerable way, and their bodies and the souls are going to be in my hands as a physician. In a real direct way, my soul is going to be on the line for the care I provide or I don't provide. And I have this direct impact over caring for other people that I'm going to need to account for at the end of my life. And so I was very overwhelmed, and I realized I really needed help. And so this is where my path, thankfully, the Lord just wrapped me in his arms. And at times I've been so scared, but he's been able to help me through my faith and to get from there to where I am today. And so it was through formation in college. It was through, thankfully, a spiritual director in medical school who encouraged me to seek out the Catholic Medical Association, which didn't exist in New Orleans and existed a few hours away. I went to my first conference in 2009 in Springfield, Illinois, and it was on the theology of suffering. And here I was as a medical student, second year, and I was just in awe. I saw these physicians around me. They were kneeling in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. And I thought, oh my gosh, it can be a both and. I can do this. And I guess I just was so naive. I don't know. But I was so filled with joy. And I used the image of a fire hydrant that's like the water's coming out of it and it just can't stop. It's kind of like broken, I guess. But that's how I felt. It was like the joy was just rushing out. Because I thought, wow, this is what God's calling me to do. And I'm finally here and I'm seeing it. And so there were like maybe 5 students there that year. I mean, there wasn't any student presence really in the organization. And so I left there and I went back to med school and I had this, renewed vigor for life and for being a doctor, like I can do this. And then a few months later, I had an email just copied to me, it wasn't even really sent to me, but it said Natalie Rodden will be leading a national student effort for the Catholic Medical Association. And I thought, what? I did not apply for this. I didn't want to do this. I didn't feel qualified to do this. I'm someone who can't even hardly defend her faith. I left in the middle of the classroom. It was kind of dramatic. Like, I just got up and I went to this church downtown New Orleans, and I just prayed. And I have my prayer journal from that day, and like, Lord, I don't want this, but like, how did this come into my lap? And I really don't know how these connections were made to think that I would do this, but like many things in life that you don't apply for, that you don't really want, but that come in your lap, you kind of have to question why, Lord, and is this what you want? And if it's what you want, then I want it too. And so it just took, that was truly amazing. And although, yes, it was stressful, as Dr. Millay implied, like medical school is hard to balance everything, but it gave a meaning for my medical school time. I was able to study, but I was able to know that this work and being a doctor, I was also going to help other medical students because we were all sort of reinventing the wheel in our own medical schools. We were, how do we confront this OBGYN clerkship we have to do if we're not going to prescribe contraception? Or how do we deal with this doctor who's wanting us to assist in vasectomies? Or, all these things that we're all having to deal with in our same medical schools and feeling alone and discouraged. And so it was a really beautiful thing, and through that I found this wonderful group of mentors, like Dr. Millay, who helps, I'm sure, many students. I got to know you at the boot camp. As a med student, to know that there's doctors out there that are living and breathing and doing this work is so encouraging to us, to know that we can do it too. And so through all this, I was super grateful, and I was also grateful that God didn't call me to do anything. I was not called to the beginning of life as far as like clinical work. Like I wasn't going to be a family doctor. I wasn't going to be an obstetrician, and I was grateful for that because I didn't want to have to deal with contraception. That was scary. I didn't want to confront people. I didn't want to deal with something, and so I wanted to do something very safe. And so I thought, I'll do internal medicine, and then maybe I'll go into oncology or something, and I'll just take care of people, and I won't have any ethical issues, and I'll just do my thing as a Catholic. And so then I went to the University of Utah for internal medicine, which I thought would also be an easy place because it's a predominantly Mormon or Latter-day Saint culture, and it would be easy to be a Catholic. And in some ways it was, because they have different beliefs. They're used to respecting different beliefs, and they were able to respect my beliefs. But I think God just kind of was like, okay, we'll keep you sort of comfortable right now. And it was during my residency that I realized as I would come on shift, a lot of my classmates would save these like difficult family meetings for when I would come. Or they would say, we don't want to talk about this topic. Will you go do that? Or I was seeing myself advocating for patients and their needs. And there was a particular patient I was advocating for to keep her baby. And these different scenarios that happened to me, it was finally like in my second year that a cardiology fellow said, have you thought about palliative care? It's like you're made for that. And I didn't even know what it was. And so she connected me with this woman who was in her fellowship currently, and I called her, and then I just almost started crying because I was like, this is me. This is exactly what I want to be. This is like who I am. And Utah didn't have a palliative fellowship. We didn't have like any palliative care doctors there. I mean, it's such a new field. And so then I went to fellowship, still thinking, oh, this will be so nice. There's not going to be no problems. I'll be so safe in this work. And then in my fellowship, I started to kind of realize, oh, there's a lot of issues that really aren't clear cut. And my attendings, I started like getting uncomfortable with things at times. Like, are we really caring for this patient the best way possible? One of our attendings was actually nicknamed the closer because of I think, prematurely hastening death. And I'm like, what is going on here? And it was through this time, I'm still like praying a lot and figuring like, God, how do you want me to do this? But I'm going to go work at a Catholic hospital. I got this great job at this Catholic hospital in Colorado, and it's going to be safe and good. And then I moved to Colorado, and 3 months after I moved there, physician-assisted suicide becomes legal. And I never would have moved to Colorado, and I never would have done any of this. And now I'm realizing more and more that this is an ethical minefield, and there's nothing clear-cut about it. And what does it even mean to be Catholic in this? And I'll tell you that I have people come up to me on a semi-regular basis that will say things to me like, how can you be Catholic and be a palliative care doctor? Or you must go to confession all the time. And I'll tell you, this happens. And it's really hard because I'm like here trying to be the best I can and realizing there's so much misunderstanding and really opportunities to grow and to serve and to advocate. And it was through all of this that God was preparing me. He knew I wasn't ready back then. But eventually he's like, okay, Natalie, this is where I think you can really serve and help and be. So that's a little bit about my story. And I would like to transition into thinking about how we live our faith in our work and in the world is really like it's like a balance. And it's very difficult at times because I think a lot of us here, we're not called to the cloister. We're called to the trenches. We're called to the hospitals, the clinics. We're not meant to be pocketed away somewhere. We're meant to be in the midst of the world. And so how do we engage the culture and provide good medicine and love the people we work with and love our patients, even though their values and their mindset and their decisions may be very different from our own? And how do we also have the fortitude to adhere to the truth and not compromise our values, our conscience, and our faith? How do we know and have the prudence to know When do we speak up? When do we be quiet? Because I'll tell you, a lot of times I feel like this. It's so scary to be out there and to be Catholic in the world today. It's no fun. And I want to weep, or I just do weep. And I'll tell you, when physician-assisted suicide passed, I wept. I said, how am I going to be able to do this, Lord? This is the antithesis of palliative care. This debunks any value that palliative care has. This is what patients are going to be hearing. And it was the literal day after I took my board exam. Like, I took this 16-hour test that was the pinnacle of 12 years of school on a Monday. And I finished, and I went out for margaritas, and I was all excited. I'm finally going to be a doctor, and I'm done with tests. And the next day, this passes. It couldn't have been more clear that God was like, okay, this is what you have to deal with. This is how I want you to love and serve in the midst of this. But it's hard, and I think sometimes I can feel so overwhelmed because we don't bounce back as easily. It's like I get discouraged, and I think we can probably relate to that in our own work and in the culture, like and in our colleagues, like not understanding us, and we can feel like our compassion we get exhausted, and it's so hard. Like, the more we form ourselves and we know what the church teaches, and then we don't see that being practiced, in our culture or even in our Catholic healthcare systems, and life is sacred, but patients are considered burdens. And it's so challenging to know this, but to not see it realized. And how do we not take this home with us every day when we leave work? How do we not let this really discourage us? Because sometimes I just feel like this. And I think as Catholics in healthcare, we can really be affected in a unique way. And I think I briefly want to highlight, this concept of burnout. That was the theme of the Catholic Medical Association's meeting in Nashville last month. And so for those of you who went, we heard about it ad nauseum. But for those of you who didn't, I just want to bring it here for just a minute, because it's so true. And I think we in healthcare can just be like perfectly primed for it. So this burnout syndrome is defined as a physiologic state resulting from prolonged exposure to job stressors characterized by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization or cynicism, and a poor sense of personal accomplishment. And so you feel overwhelmed by your job, you feel fatigued, exhausted, and then you start to detach from the people that you care for. And you lose that joy that initially got you into this field and that you worked so hard to do. And it can lead to a feeling that your work has lost its meaning. And sometimes it makes you feel like you just want to give up. And I think that for those of us in healthcare, many of us are like high achieving. We're kind of that perfectionist type A personality. We strive to meet these high work demands. We strive to please everyone around us. And then we may neglect our own needs. And so we may not seek help. We may not seek support that when we need it. We might not be really thinking about how do we keep this sustained. And so, briefly, there's just different factors. How do we regain meaning? How do we reinstate the meaning that we used to have? How do we get back purpose in our work? How do we get that meaning back? How do we create opportunities for continuing to grow despite this difficult culture? And there's different ways in the different studies that are out there, but they're pretty obvious, right? Like things like supportive colleagues, improving our relationships, being grateful and focusing on that. But spirituality, that's in the literature out there. And that's something today I'm going to really highlight, because we have this amazing gift of our faith. And that can truly keep the fire in us to keep doing this work. And that is something that a lot of our colleagues, unfortunately, don't have. And a lot of our patients don't have. And so I'm going to really focus on that today. And so using this term of professional vocation, so whatever line of work you're in, or if you're a student, that's your professional vocation right now. And so there's a difference, right, between a job and a career and a calling. And there's a deeper purpose in a calling. And for so many of us, I feel so grateful to go to work each day and to think like, wow, I get to love people in this unique way. And what a gift that is. And I'm so grateful that I have so many in my faith to help guide me. And you might say, well, who are you talking about? And it's the communion of saints. Because just like we mentioned in some of the saints that Dr. Millay highlighted, and in St. Luke, we have these amazing people that live lives just like us, in circumstances like ours, difficult circumstances, and yet they were able to achieve holiness in that. And I love this quote because it's kind of medical. The communion of saints, how shall I explain it to you? You know what blood transfusions do for the body? Well, that's what the communion of saints does for the soul. And you think about someone who's really anemic, and then they get a blood transfusion, now they perk up. That's how we can kind of think about, and we call on the saints to support us. And they were perfectly ordinary people, but yet they followed Jesus at this sacrificial self-gift to others. And so they're really, really amazing. And some that I highlight that have helped me, and so many of you may know them. The top right, Saints Cosmas and Damian, they're doing their famous leg transplant. We're not sure how successful that was, but, they did it. Padre Pio in the bottom left, he had a hospital for the sick and suffering in Italy. St. Luke, our patron. St. Gianna Molla, a beautiful female physician. I mean, there are saints in so many colors, walks of life, and we can connect to them in so many ways. It's beautiful. And I love this quote, to live a special communion of the saints. And at the moment of interior struggle, as well as during the long hours of your work, each of you will feel the joy and the strength of not being alone. And one saint in particular I'm going to highlight today is Saint JosemariaEscriva. And the reason I'm highlighting him is because he's the patron saint of ordinary life. And so for most of us, we're not doing crazy things, we're just doing ordinary work in our ordinary life. And maybe it can be kind of mundane sometimes. And St. Josemaria was born in 1902 in Spain, and he died in 1975, and he was canonized by John Paul II in 2002. He was this big writer and this passionate priest. And he spoke a lot about sanctification of work. And he said, sanctify your work, sanctify yourself through your work, and sanctify others through your work. And so we can just be doing anything, and yet we can make it holy. And it can be a gift from ourselves to God. He also spoke about passionately loving the world. We're meant to be in the world. Like, we're here in it. We're here in the trenches. And how can we love God at the same time as truly living in this world and loving the world, despite all of its blemishes and problems? We don't want to hide from the world, but how can we live in the midst of it, living fully and living virtuously? And so bringing holiness to those around us who are wounded, who are uninformed, who are scared, who don't understand the sanctity of life, the sanctity of marriage, or how precious they are in the eyes of God. And I think as Catholics, we can radically love those around us by sanctifying the world. And so as we approach our work, it's a totally different mindset. Right where you are, and you can put your love into your work and make it holy. You can make it a holy explosion. And it doesn't have to be crazy. You can be just doing mundane things. You can be cleaning your bathroom. You can be changing diapers. You can be seeing that patient that is so difficult. Work invites us to live this universal call to holiness. And it's not just 9 to 5. This holiness extends through all of our life. And it's not just in church. This needs to be brought forth in all of our work. And to love and offer those less glamorous parts, that's when we can really, really show God how much we love him, I think. And when I have that very difficult case, or for me, like when a patient tells me that they want the drugs to say bye-bye, I have that sometimes, and to get consulted, and my heart is so hurting. And how can I love them? How can I just pour myself out to know that they have value? To offer up those hardships, and to give God our very best. Work is something to be taken very seriously because it's our opportunity to fully offer our gifts to him. And so ordinary things can be done extraordinarily well with this mindset. It's really in our intention. And it's not about our end result all the time. It's about how we go into it. And God is really judging our effort. He's not judging our results. I think that's really hard sometimes as a physician because I'm all about achieving things, or, I have to do this. No, Natalie, you don't have to do anything. You just have to be. You have to be loved, and you have to love others. And so I go into that patient room and I do my very best. And I try to love where they're at. And a lot of times I maybe don't get them to where I feel I should have, or I fail in some way. But that doesn't keep me down, because I'm like, Lord, I give this to you. And I have to keep going, and I give my next patient to you too. And so this really is our faith, this living, this active, dynamic relationship with God. And John Paul II wrote, "To this end, it is more necessary than ever for all the faithful to move from a faith of habit, sustained perhaps by social context alone, to a faith which is conscious and personally lived. The renewal of faith will always be the best way to lead others to the truth that is Christ." So as a Catholic, our faith is alive and dynamic. Our relationship with God helps drive us in all of our interactions and our relationships. And I'll tell you, people will notice. People will notice. The people come to me sometimes and they'll say, I've never been cared for like this before. And I didn't think I did anything extra or anything like that, but it's just that you may have been the only person that saw through their woundedness, or you were able to shed the light of Christ to that patient that day or that person. And it's beyond what I ever could have envisioned myself. But people sort of see that sometimes, or I'll take care of a difficult patient, and others will be like, "Wow, you were so nice to him. He's so difficult to work with." It's just shedding light on his dignity. It's just trying to be with him in that moment. But it's different. It's different than a lot of people are used to. And in this way, we evangelize. And Benedict XVI said, "To evangelize means to show this path, to teach the art of living. This is why we are in need of a new evangelization. If the art of living remains an unknown, nothing else works. This art is not the object of science. This art can only be communicated by one who has life, he who is the gospel personified." And so through how we live, we can really shed the light of Christ on others. I don't want to be known as this really Catholic doctor girl. I want to be known as this really this person who loves. And so in thinking of some practical applications that have helped me, prayer is pretty obvious. Having Jesus in our life and having this relationship with him is the most important relationship. It's what matters most. And how do we do that when we're so busy, when we're between call shifts, and when we have a bunch of kids in the back seat, or when we have so many things on our plate? Maybe it's praying a rosary between things. Maybe it's quiet time in the car. Maybe it's a prayer before starting a class, before starting a meeting, before going into a patient room. I used to always pray the Memorare before walking into the ICU in my residency for these 30-hour shifts. And it was always like, "Mary, I can't do this alone. Will you be with me in this? I only can do it with you." Silence, having time for God, to being able to listen. Because external silence leads to internal silence, which facilitates this purification so we can really surrender to the will of God in our lives. How can we make time for God? Maybe in the car on the way to work. Maybe there's a few minutes at lunchtime that we can make time. Maybe there's an adoration chapel a little bit off our commute, but we can stop there and take a few minutes. Just being able to say hi to Jesus during our day. To completely put ourselves in God's presence. Is there a way I could take a weekend and take a retreat? As you can imagine, I'm pretty talkative, so it's hard for me, but I've gone on these silent retreats, and there's so much fruit that comes out of that. And it's very beautiful, that gift you can give of yourself to God. Spiritual reading, the writings of the saints. There's even things like a daily saint email or a daily encouraging words. You can get on these email lists or podcasts. These things that you can practically bring into your daily work to help your faith life. Reading the Magnificat or other devotionals can be helpful. Offering up specific tasks. That's really helpful, I think, when we're in our line of work in healthcare, because there's a lot of things that we don't really like so much. Like, I have to go to 2 hours of charting now. And how can I offer this charting up for something else? Like, maybe I'll offer this up for my uncle who is dealing with cancer. And so as I do this charting, I say, "Lord, sanctify this time. Sanctify my charting." And then I do it with gusto because I'm doing this for my uncle. You don't always have to tell them. Sometimes I have told people, like, "I offered up this hour of study for you," but They may or may not think that's weird, but anyway, it's a very beautiful gift you can give. Spiritual direction has really been helpful for me as a physician, especially with dealing with the end-of-life ethics issues and fighting for life in a culture of death. And I encourage you too, if you don't have that, just having someone to help you stay strong, stay purified, putting you in the right direction can be really, really helpful. Taking advantage of the sacraments and service work. How can I give of myself? And sometimes it's really like where God can use my gifts. Like I recently became an RCIA sponsor at my parish, and I'd never done that before, but I thought, well, this is something so outside my comfort zone, but I want to try to love someone and walk with them through entering into the church. So, we can think outside the box sometimes. It doesn't have to be always in our line of work that maybe God is calling us to, but maybe something outside of that. So I really encourage you to be open and be prayerful about how can I maybe love him in another way. Someone told me, because I was feeling sort of overwhelmed, Natalie, you're only to give to God in response of what he's given to you. He's given me everything, so, okay. Thanks a lot. And so an hour of study, St. Josemaria said, for a modern apostle is an hour of prayer. And this really, really helped me in medical school and in training and studying for my boards. And how can I devote all my attention to the task at hand and really make that a prayer? I'm putting my expectations in the Lord, because if I put my expectations in my job or in my relationships or in the present culture and the scenario, I'm going to inevitably be let down. I'll be disappointed. But if I put my expectations in the Lord and I keep them super high, he's never going to let me down. I trust him. I surrender my life. I surrender to what's in front of me. I surrender all that to him. And yet, it can be really scary. And I think what happens is, through forming ourselves better, we become more strongly lights of Christ. And opportunities just start presenting themselves. Things that probably pull us even further out of our comfort zone. Things that even make us more afraid. That's what's happened to me, at least. And I told my spiritual director recently that a word that keeps coming up for me in how I'm trying to approach my relationship with God is dangerous. Not like I'm like at risk of being hurt, but no, I'm not living safe. I'm not living safe as a Catholic doctor. I'm not living safe as a young woman. I'm saying, if I live safe, I'm just putting my life in a box that I'm controlling everything and I'm keeping it here and close to my heart, and this is what I feel comfortable doing. I'm living dangerously. I want to see where the Lord can work in my life and where I can say yes to him and where I can say, oh my gosh, I never had envisioned that, but okay, I'm following your will. And I think, how can I live more dangerously in that complete abandonment to the Lord working? And I really think that these opportunities, there's ways that we can creatively bring our faith, and ways we can dignify in our own environments, in our own workplace. So one thing I've done in my hospital is I give them homework when I see them, because so often the patients are very ill, and the family members are struggling on what can I do. They want a job. They need a job. They need something to do. And I say, okay, this is your assignment. I want you to choose one picture that represents who your loved one is and how you would like their healthcare team to see them, and bring it in. But oftentimes they don't bring one picture. They bring a whole collage. They fill a whole wall. And for us as a medical team, I don't just see the patient in this blue gown with a tube and going in their throat and all these IVs. I see a person who's caught that big bass fish and who loves cooking with their grandchildren and who enjoys hiking, or who recently went to the Great Wall of China or something. That's what I see. And that's that humanizing, that dignifying sense of who they are. And the studies show, there's actually been studies on this, that patients get longer visits by their nursing staff and physicians when we see who they are. It's not just the heart attack in bed 5. It's Bill who caught that big fish. And I want to talk about that because I like fishing too. And so these opportunities come up. And I think the more that we form ourselves, the more we might see like, oh, I need to talk to that colleague. Do I have the courage? Can I do it? And it really strives us to live virtuously, because we must kind of pick our battles sometimes. I laugh sometimes because there's so many things I could probably improve in my hospital. And it's trying to figure out what is the Lord asking me right now? And what is he asking me in the field of palliative medicine? What is he asking me in the Catholic Church? Going through where God has placed us, what environment he's put us in, and what he's asking us to do to go further. And it's super hard. And I don't want to take away that just to look at everything through rose-colored glasses, because in choosing to be Catholic in our world today, we're going to have suffering associated with it. Yet, the suffering is not a waste. It's so not void of meaning, because we can unite our suffering with Jesus' suffering, which he did for all of us. And so, if Jesus can do it for others, can we do it too? How can we unite ourselves with the Lord and really strive for holiness? And how can we really achieve sanctity? Because I'll say all those saints up there, they didn't get that title on an easy joyride. They had immense suffering too. And so really, really looking at this face of Jesus as this antidote to suffering, and how he turned suffering into the good of eternal salvation. And how can I do that in my life? And I think we do that by seeing the cross not just as a cross of despair or of punishment, but truly a cross of joy, because it was through the cross that we are healed. And Jesus is freeing us from eternal suffering. And so we must depart from the poor me complex, which is super hard. I struggle with that sometimes. Lord, why did you make me Catholic? And why is this so difficult? And why do I have to be in palliative care? And why do I see all these problems that I have to keep fighting against? But suffering, it's inherent to this walk that we have. And God is glorified through the sanctifying effect of our suffering. And I think sanctification really is identifying, taking our will and trying to align it with God's will, right? And just say, do you want this, Lord? Then I want it too. And to really take that, and with this mindset, this relationship with God and modeling our lives after Jesus can turn any suffering into a love story. Because suffering is present in the world to release love, to transform the civilization into a civilization of love. Because we have this special grace in suffering to draw closer to Christ. In some of the most desolate times in my life, I've been able to draw the closest to the Lord and to say, I cannot do this alone. I need you with me right now. And suffering, we know, is not the end, because to live through and persevere with sufferings is to live on with Christ. And that's truly the only way that I would be able to do my work every day, and to be able to sit with people in immense suffering and immense vulnerability at their bedside, and to love them in those moments, and to help them realize that they have so much meaning and value. Some people call my work being a midwife for the soul. You're helping bridge that person to the next life, to eternal life. And it's truly a gift to do it. And I'm going to briefly highlight this document that's been very helpful for me in my walk, and it's called Salvifici Dolores, and it's an apostolic letter. It means on the Christian meaning of human suffering. And if you haven't read it, it's not very long. And John Paul wrote it to really help us understand better what it means to suffer and to suffer well. And he said, suffering seems to belong to man's transcendence. It is one of those points in which man is in a certain sense destined to go beyond himself, and he is called to this in a mysterious way. And human suffering evokes compassion. It also evokes respect, and in its own way it intimidates. For in suffering is contained the greatness of a specific mystery. And suffering truly can be transformed into joy. And when we completely surrender to God and we give him our full yes, we are filled with such joy. And I had in confession once, the priest told me, Natalie, when you said yes to being a Catholic doctor, you said no countless more times. You didn't know it yet, but what it meant to be a Catholic doctor. And your yes has no value unless you have a lot more no's. You can't just say yes to everything where God is putting you in your life. And so how can I live this joy in spite of all the challenges, in spite of all the difficulties? And I love this quote by St. Josemaria. The cheerfulness you should have is not the kind we might call physiological, like that of a healthy animal. Rather, it is the supernatural happiness that comes from the abandonment of everything including yourself, into the loving arms of our Father, God. So to strive to be an ordinary person living extraordinary joy. For people to wonder, why is she so happy? And I'm not always happy, but it's this inner joy of I trust him. I trust him in my life. And to be joyful as we try to live this holy life. And it's tough. And this is a book that is hard, The Abandonment to Divine Providence. I don't know if anyone of you have read it, but at times I wanted to throw it across the room because it's very tough. And he says, devote yourself vigorously, uniquely, to the excellent practice of complete self-abandonment to the will of God. Therein lies for you the whole of perfection. It is the easiest road and leads soonest and most surely to a deep and unalterable peace. Well, that's good. But it is also a sure guarantee of our soul through the most furious tempests. Ugh. The soul that truly abandons itself to God has nothing to fear from the most violent storms. And so I think what makes us unique as Catholic healthcare workers and those in all of our fields of work, here we are to advocate for life and to radically love in the trenches of whatever we're doing and to elevate human dignity in all our walks of life. We each can make a difference. I feel so small. I work in a healthcare system where I'm one just little palliative care doctor. But at my own hospital, we have an ethics committee. I was asked to be on it. I'm there at our first meeting, and I'm realizing no one is really using ethical principles or talking about ethics. So, of course, then I end up leading the ethics committee, but I start teaching them on, I'll teach them the principle of double effect. I'll teach them what our ethical and religious directives for healthcare say, because we are a Catholic healthcare institution. How do we bring to life these teachings in our daily work? And then I realized, okay, we're not following a lot of these in our hospital. So then I was, praying about it, and then it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll seek someone higher. So I met with the Catholic mission leaders for our whole system. There's 15 hospitals. Then they sent me to the CEO of the whole system, and then I met with him. And it's really scary meeting with the CEO of, there's 21,000 employees in this healthcare system. And to say to him, help me understand what it means to work at a Catholic healthcare, in Catholic healthcare. And what does it mean when we're not following these things? Do you realize how these are being done in the trenches? And, I don't know, he listened to me. But this year, just last month, we had a doctor who tried to prescribe physician-assisted suicide drugs to a patient who asked for them. And she sued the hospital because she couldn't. And then she was fired. And then the healthcare system, sent out an email to all the people that work there and said, we stand for the sanctity of life. We're standing behind our mission and our values, and we do not stand for physician-assisted suicide. And then he sent out another email later in the week. Because I had cautioned him the year before when I met with him, if we're going to be against physician-assisted suicide, we have to really stand for good palliative care and mental health and spiritual care. So then the next email we get from him, it's to all the doctors, this email, that work for the system, and he says, if you don't agree with our mission and working here, you can work somewhere else. Because we're standing for good palliative care, spiritual health, and mental health. And I'm like, whoa, hey. But, it doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't even connect that with me. But it's just who knows what seeds, God can use you in to, make a difference later on. We never know. We oftentimes don't see the fruit of what our work or what we say or what we do how they can change. But I think it's worth trying. We have a little chapel in my hospital. We're a Catholic hospital, but we never have Mass. So no one was really working at getting Mass, so I just called up a priest locally and said, would you mind coming and saying Mass? So now at least we have Masses on holy days of obligation. Well, then I was realizing the patients are never going to Mass, so I said, well, why don't we start wheeling them down? So I had to get permission from the ICU, but I would take patients down there with me. And then I realized that we can film the Mass and on a camera and stream it to the patient rooms on a certain channel. So then I did that. But it's little things. How do we be creative and think outside the box? And do that, because it can be scary. It was definitely scary meeting with my CEO. And it wasn't, I guess I kind of said, well, Lord, if you want me to lose my job over this, I'll do it. I hope not. But I'll tell you, he received me and I think respected me more. My CMO, my chief medical officer of my hospital, he told me once, he's like, well, you're pretty annoying sometimes. But you bring us all to higher levels of excellence. Because I call people out sometimes. I'm like, well, we didn't use an interpreter in that case, and I don't know if the patient understands at all what's going on. Or that patient is, we didn't get consent for them to get this surgery. Or, whatever I'm doing to advocate for these patients, these very vulnerable patients, it helps elevate the rest of the people around you. And again, it's doing it out of love. I'm not doing it just to slap someone's wrist or something, but it's gently and persistently loving. And so even as one little person, I can make a huge impact. And I think everyone here in this room can too. Because our beliefs and the ethical framework we have as Catholics, and how we love others, and how we aim for virtuous medicine, and in virtue in whatever line of work we do, that gives us this supernatural grace and power to really love. It's truly a gift and a privilege, I think, to have this professional vocation and to serve in this way, to accompany people in such moments of crisis, in immense suffering, in such vulnerability. And in palliative care, I might not be able to fix any patient, but I can creatively work to reduce their suffering, and I can radically love them and meet them in the midst of the trials that they're going through. And so in closing, sanctify your work, sanctify others through your work, stay close to the Lord, have gratitude for this beautiful professional vocation we have, and have courage because you can do it. We can live as Catholic healthcare workers, and we can live as Catholic in our work in such beautiful, brilliant ways. We just have to say yes to Him. So thank you, and if you wouldn't mind closing in prayer with me, I have a memorare here. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgin, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petition, but in your mercy hear and answer me. Amen. Thank you so much.